with news that was a bit of a bombshell in the world of tennis yesterday. The number one ranked women's player, female player in the world, Ash Barty, the number one overall player in the world on the women's side, Ash Barty, officially announced her retirement from the sport of tennis at the age of 25. She says that in a 6-minute Instagram video yesterday, she posted that she was really happy with her decision and that she has other dreams that she wants to chase. And it's time for her to put her rackets down. She felt like the time was now. She was ready to make this decision. It's been a decision that's been lingering over her for quite some time. And she officially called it a quits yesterday. And the big thing for her, and she laid this out in this video, was winning Wimbledon was her number one true goal when she became a pro. And once she accomplished that, there was a certain burden that was lifted off her shoulders, where she felt she's accomplished this major feat. Now, at the time when she won Wimbledon, which was her second overall Grand Slam, she's won 3. She obviously won the 2020 Australian Open, the 2022, Australian Open just a couple months ago in January. She won the French Open in 2019, and she won Wimbledon in 2021. But as much as she thought Wimbledon was going to kind of satisfy that personal goal for her, it didn't satisfy it enough until she won the Australian Open in 2022. And we obviously haven't seen her play in many matches since then. She's kind of not participated in a lot of the tournaments post the Australian Open 2022. So she's already won 3 Grand Slams at the age of 25. I laid those 3 out. When she turned pro in 2010, so when she was literally a 13-year-old is when she first joined the junior competition level. That's when she started her career. She's won 15 singles titles, 12 doubles titles in different tournaments over the course of her career. She spent 121 weeks as the number one ranked player in the world, including the last 114 consecutive weeks as the top female player in the world. And even just a couple months ago, she recently announced her engagement to a professional golf trainee, Gary Kissick, his name, in November, which was leading up to the Australian Open. So a lot of her personal and professional goals had been satisfied. But I'd be lying if I said that this wasn't shocking and this wasn't absolutely stunning, because it was. Now, I will say I'm a little bit dubious that she's fully retiring from the game and not just taking perhaps a 2-year hiatus, because she's done this before. Back in 2011, when she was just a junior competing, that's when she kind of got started on the tour in 2011 at age 15. She left the tour for nearly 2 years in 2014 because she was just burnt out, overwhelmed by the pressure and the stress of having to perform time and time again. And then when she returned home during that brief hiatus, she joined the Australian cricket team and eventually played enough cricket competitively led her back to the tennis court. She picked up a racket, and obviously we know what she's been doing ever since that time. And so we've seen athletes kind of renege on their retirements in the past. We've seen Michael Jordan do it after he won 3 titles with the Bulls in 1993. He stepped away for 2 years, came back, won 3 more. Tom Brady most recently just reneged on his retirement, but he's 41 years old. But the thing about her that makes this really interesting is the sport that she's playing and the type of player that she is. She's a very savvy player. One of the things that I've talked about whenever I've watched Ash Barty is how clever and savvy she is as a player. Obviously, her forehand and her ground strokes have always been tremendous, but Her forehand's been powerful, but it's been her slice on her backhand that she could manipulate points with that's allowed her to operate so methodically and so different and unique from her contemporaries. Most people can't move you around the court with their backhand slice. With their backhand, yes. With a backhand slice, it's very difficult to do. And Ash Barty has been one of the few players in the history of the game that's managed to control points and dominate points using that slice and then allowing herself to buy time to create that window of opportunity with her forehand to crush a shot cross court or down the line. But I think even more importantly than who she's been as a player, how she's conducted herself, the way that she's represented herself on the court is second to none. She has always shown a tremendous amount of class, very stoic after points for the most part, doesn't show much emotion, but the way that she respects her opponents, the grace that she shows, she's super calm, super collected. She's been very unique. Doesn't ever belt that often after big points. Maybe gives herself a small fist pump, but that's about the extent of it. And she's been one of the great ambassadors of the sport. And in a lot of ways, I would say one of the more recent torchbearers of the sport. And it's a blow to tennis that we're not going to see her. And I think it's going to be really difficult for us, and especially myself, to envision what she's going to be doing after tennis. It's almost like when Kobe retired in the NBA, it took a minute to get used to seeing him pour himself fully into children's storytelling. It took a minute for that to sink in. And what also makes this particularly interesting is we've actually seen this before in the sport of tennis specifically. And I'll highlight a couple of the reasons why in just a moment. But you think about some of the greatest tennis players who have ever played. Bjorn Borg, perfect example of a guy who would have been a generational player. The Swedish guy retired at the age of 26. He had won 11 Grand Slams at that point, kind of officially retired in 1983, tried to come back briefly in 1991, didn't make much noise, officially retired again in 1993. He was just kind of burnt out, lost the joy that he once had for the game. Justine Henin, fantastic Belgian tennis player. She won 7 Grand Slams. At one point, spent 61 weeks as the top ranked female in the world. She was number 1 in the world in May of 2008 when she retired. But she just lost the joy. She was burnt out. She was overspent. And that's oftentimes what you see from these tennis players, is that losing of a desire to continue to train the way that you train every single day. And obviously we've seen other athletes in their prime retire. Now, certain athletes, like as I mentioned, Michael Jordan, he briefly retired once in his early 30s when he had just turned 31, right? We've seen Bo Jackson. He retired at 31 in the 1980s. Earl Campbell retired after some incredible 6 years in the NFL. He was a Pro Bowler 5 of the first 6 seasons in the NFL, retired at age 31. Jim Brown retired at the age of 30. He had just come off an MVP season in 1965 for the Browns when he retired. Floyd Mayweather, we saw kind of wavered back and forth, but he announced his official retirement at the time after he defeated Oscar De La Hoya at the age of 30. We saw Sandy Koufax, of course, with the Dodgers. He retired at the age of 30. He was coming off a season with his lowest ERA in the history of his professional career. He had already won 4 World Series at that point, and he announced his retirement. Now, all of those guys announced their retirements post the age of 30. There are just a handful of examples of athletes that announced their retirements in their 20s, and that's what makes this unique. But Ash Barty's 25. You think about some of the more recent ones. Andrew Luck in the NFL, he was 29 when he retired. Gale Sayers, former running back of the Chicago Bulls, announced his retirement when he was 28. Perhaps the most notable one, most people don't even know of, is Mark Spitz, who was the Mike Phelps before the Michael Phelps, the Olympic swimmer. Between the 1968 and 1972 Olympics, he captured 9 gold medals in that time frame. And he retired at the age of 22 and then tried to come back about 2 decades later, and obviously that didn't work out. But the difference is some of these athletes that I mentioned can be grouped and clustered together with Ash Barty. The difference is Ash Barty was number 1 in the world, not just like a top 10 player, the number 1 player in the world. And obviously some of these athletes were dealing with chronic injuries that derailed their careers, and the comeback just was too grueling. And Ash Barty is managing to leave injury free. But the one thing that I do know about tennis, because I've been playing a long time, and to get to even a college level, which I had received scholarships to play in college, so I understand to a certain degree what it takes to play collegiately. And I've got other friends who play Division I who are trying to make it on the tour. The one thing I know about tennis is to be great at that level, it is such a grind, because it is a completely solitary sport. It's an individual sport. You're training by yourself. You're constantly on the road. Maybe you have a coach, a small team that you're traveling with, but you're not training with many other pros. It's just hours and hours of you by yourself on the court. And even when you're playing with someone, it's not like you're playing a team sport where it's 5v5 or 11 on 11. It's 1v1. So your interactions with other athletes are minimal. You're training by yourself. Even if you are Ash Barty and you're the number 1 player in the world and your accommodations are top of the line wherever you go, you're still by yourself. You're traveling on the road for months on end, just you and maybe your small team. That's about it. So it can be physically and emotionally draining, which is something that she noted. It was physically and emotionally draining and taxing. And again, I can speak to it to some degree. Practicing tennis by yourself, it's just you're playing with one person. It gets a bit repetitive, and it's exhausting, it's taxing, and have to be doing that for years on end. The fact that she turned pro in 2010 when she was 13, you have to imagine all of the practices that she put in before that just to get to that point. So this is a major blow to women's tennis, because I was just complimenting Iga Swiatek a couple days ago for winning the Indian Wells tournament, because she was one of the newer up-and-coming female tennis players that was starting to show a little bit more consistency at the top of the level, and starting to etch her name into that consistent group of women like Ash Barty, like Serena Williams, like Naomi Osaka for a brief stretch for about 4 years. Ash Barty had been the number 1 women's player in the world for a good stretch, and Iga Swiatek obviously wasn't showing that kind of dominance, but she was starting to kind of become a little bit more consistent. Now it's just going to become a musical chairs of who's going to win these tournament events. It's like driving on the 405 in LA during COVID. It's completely open, completely free to drive here. It's a wild, wild west. So it's going to be up for the taking to see who's actually going to grab the mantle from her from now on, because a bunch of players have had their moments. It's a blow because you lose again a little bit of stability at the top with Ash Barty no longer playing. So on a personal level, I'm obviously happy that she's happy with the decision. That's the most important thing. It's been a true privilege to see her play over the course of her career. She's elevated the sport, she's elevated the game, and we're going to miss her dearly. Now, would I be surprised If in 2 years or 3 years from now she tries to make a return, no, I would not. She's 25 years old. So even if she did decide to take several years off, she would still be in her 20s trying to make a comeback. Unlike some of these other athletes who waited till they were in their 30s, she'd be in her 20s, which is a lot more doable in that instance at that age. But so so a small portion of me is a little dubious, just like we just saw Tom Brady unretire a couple weeks ago. I wouldn't be entirely shocked if Ash Barty did it, but for the moment and the present, it's a bombshell in women's tennis. It's a bombshell in women's tennis, and I wish her nothing but the best. But again, she's been an absolutely fantastic ambassador of the sport and a fantastic player. Really, really fantastic player. It's been a pleasure to watch her perform.